All right. Do a little sound check because you should learn from your mistakes. And doing a sound check is me learning from my mistakes. So before I hit record for real and we start doing this, I just want to make sure that I am getting it on all fronts, right? Beautiful transitions here. That's all we get, right? And when I go to talk about Sir Piece of Shit Jared Sparks, we got our guy here, right? And I can say this is our Sparks. This is where we're blah 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 blah. We hate that guy. This kid hates a strong word. We don't really like him very much, right? Just not what we're doing right now. Okay. And the good old Chromebook, we just don't need to go there, right? Right? We could always move to here. Right? Boom. We got that. We got that. Right? And then all the way back to our landing shot, the one that I prefer. When I go over here and I go, good evening, internet. It's still good evening. Good evening. Let's go with greetings, internet. And well met dwellers. Say greetings, internet, and well met fellow Earth dwellers. And middle class Americans. Welcome to the very first episode of the Average American Podcast. I am your host, Chet Michaels, and I am incredibly pumped to have for you this show that I've got tonight and for you to be the listeners out there in listener world. Now, in this show, I want to just go over the basics. Like, we're going to be bringing to you a healthy dose of curiosity, a bit of skepticism. I'm going to do my best to have like absolutely zero tolerance for dry, boring textbook lecture bullshit. So when people think of the American spirit, now we're going to get into this. We're going to get into the American spirit, right? And so when people think of the American spirit, they usually think of something tenacious, stubborn, something completely unkillable. Right? Right? Well, we are a nation built on an absolute defiant refusal to give up. And honestly, that makes perfect sense, right? Because our very first commander-in-chief was either the luckiest human being to ever walk the earth, or some say an immortal time-traveling wizard. Well, I will let you decide. See, I would like to take you back, take you back to, well, we're going to go back to even before the revolution. Right? Because I believe that we romanticize George Washington a lot. Like, we see him on the dollar bill. He's looking all stern, like a grandpappy, He looks like somebody who goes to bed at like 8 p.m. But the real historical George Washington dude was a straight up bullet magnet, which makes for some very interesting stories, legends, stories. I mean, most of what from what I could, everything that I'm about to tell you is 100% true. Like, these are not embellished anymore. This is actually people peeling it back and trying to make it as realistic as possible. This is just what people know, what they witnessed, and it is, folks. Let me just, this is definitely not going to be the last podcast that I'm going to be doing on George Washington, because he's fascinating. There is a lot of fascinating things about him. So let's get back to the bullet magnet who simply refuses to die. So we're going to go back, like I was saying, back to 1755, long before the Revolutionary War. Washington's only 23. He's an aide in the French and Indian War, fighting alongside the British at the Battle of Monongahela. It turns into an absolute meat grinder. The British regulars are getting completely fucking slaughtered, right? On every single officer on horseback is getting picked off by hidden shooters, right? Except for George. George has a different problem. Instead of him getting picked off, the horses are getting picked off out from underneath him. So the first horse is shot right out from underneath him. He hits the dirt, rolls a little bit, gets up, kind of like dusts himself off, looks around, and there's a horse free because somebody's been shot off of it. So he just grabs the first horse he can, jumps back up on it, and he just proceeds to keep going. And poor frickin' horse, same thing happens, right? Washington hits the ground, rolls a little bit. I don't know if you've ever been thrown from a horse, but it is an ordeal. no matter, I would say in my instance, whenever I was thrown from a horse, I was very lucky because the horse wasn't very big. And so, like, very, very lucky. But still, if I hadn't been so young, and it could have been a real problem. So here, Washington is probably on a big military steed, big old white sumbitch, who knows? I know that's what he gets later on, but it's got to be a big horse, and he gets thrown off of it because, they shot the horse out from underneath him. So this happens the second time, and blah, 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 of course, and I believe this actually happens one more time, and that's when he finally is able to secure a horse that doesn't get shot out from underneath him, and he continues to organize the retreat. It's incredible. So he had no less than count it, 4 bullet holes ripped through his jacket. His hat, gone. Been shot clean off. And then so much so that I believe he was actually that night, like, he gets sitting on his bed, and he's actually pouring bullet fragments out of his boots, right? But not a single bullet pierced his skin. Didn't even bruise. It is incredible that this happened. Later on, Native American chief who fought in this battle actually traveled a pretty good distance in his old age just to look at Washington again, because he had been following Washington throughout the years, but he never forgot. And what he did through interpreters, of course, was he basically said that I told my men to fire at you. And well, pretty good shots. Like, we never miss. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he's like, my guys never miss, except for that day. And he's like, the Great Spirit would not let you die, I believe is the quote. That, who knows? It was through translators and all that whatnot. But I believe this is kind of like a modern way of saying, a beautiful spiritual way of saying, this guy was using cheat codes. So before we get too far, I want to take another little segue over here to really start to understand the Wizard of Mount Vernon. We've got to talk about some smoke and mirrors. So here enters Jared Sparks. So Jared Sparks, this is here's a Gemini rendering that I have of this guy that I'm sharing with you here. So this guy, basically, he was a very big fan of George Washington, and he was basically charged with writing the autobiography for George Washington. And so he was given all of the paperwork from Mount Vernon, like all of George Washington's correspondence and his personal papers and everything. And he thought he was doing a good thing, but what he started to do, which he basically started, he was neutering the guy. Like, any bit of rough language or any time that George Washington, like, basically showed human, like he was incredibly frustrated, Sparks sanitized it. He literally took a pen and crossed out the things that he thought were too unpresidential. He rewrote grammar, deleted practical mentions of money, scrubbed away his fierce temper, and effectively turned a flawed, complex human being into this flawless marble statue. This near deification, if you will. Sorry, I lost my way. By scrubbing away humanity, Sparks accidentally turned Washington into a ghost, leaving us to sift through the polished annals of history, trying to find the real guy who actually walked the earth. It didn't stop there. You fast forward to the Revolutionary War, though, January 1777, the Battle of Princeton. The American line is breaking. Troops are panicking and running away, and Washington rides up on a white horse. Remember I told you, his white horse? So, anyway, the reason because when you're invincible, why not wear high visibility white, right? Right? Right. So he rallies the troops, he turns them around, and then he rides his horse directly into the gap between the two armies. He is standing a mere 30 yards from the British line. To put this into perspective, that's about the distance from the quarterback to the first down marker, right? So the British raise their muskets. Washington's own aide, a guy named John Fitzgerald, is so terrified of what's about to happen that he literally pulls his hat over his eyes because he cannot bear to watch his general get vaporized. The British fire a massive, deafening volley. The entire field disappears in a cloud of thick, white smoke. Fitzgerald is weeping in his hat like a little beach. But when the smoke clears, there's George, completely untouched, waving his hat in the air, yelling, "Charge, boys! The day is ours!" So basically, if you shot George Washington, people began to notice that the universe was actively hitting Control Z before any bullet could, overcome this enchantment. I mean, Washington's old adversaries, genuinely, it came across like he was impossible to kill. It was basically impossible to penetrate his skin. That brings us to the real thing that's helped keep this experiment alive. Something I wanted to talk to you guys about, and just because I don't think it's brought up casually enough. So I want to dedicate a couple of episodes to this, hopefully try to make it as entertaining as possible, which is to go over the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. And so the first thing I want to go over with y'all is the First Amendment, basically the 5 freedoms and some inception insights. So the First Amendment, let's just get to the nitty-gritty. Let's just talk about it, right? The First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for redress of grievance. So let's look at how these actually function in our daily lives, alongside some history you probably weren't taught in middle school. The freedom of religion. This is a two-way street. The government cannot force you to practice a religion, and that's the Establishment Clause. And they cannot stop you from practicing your own religion. So that's the Free Exercise Clause. I often look back and think that the founders were a uniform group of deeply orthodox, traditional Puritans. In reality, they were a chaotic mix of Anglicans, deists, and straight-up doubters. Thomas Jefferson actually edited his own version of the Bible by taking a razor blade to the New Testament, and he literally cut out all of the supernatural miracles because he preferred just the practical moral teachings. They created freedom of religion not just to protect the church from the government, but to protect the government from the church. Now we move on to the freedom of speech, right? Now, you can voice your opinions, criticize the government, write angry tweets, express your individuality without the fear of the government throwing you into a dungeon. Now, reality check. Notice I said the government. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom from the consequences of what you say, like on social media or at your day job. If you say something wild on the internet and your boss fires you, that is not a violation of your First Amendment. That is just the free market telling you to read the fucking room. Let's move on to the freedom of the press. The media has the right to gather and publish news without the government's censorship. They are meant to be watchdogs. Anymore, it feels like they're lapdogs. We tend to romanticize early American journalism like it was this pristine, noble institution. Trust me, it was incredibly messy. In the late 1700s, newspapers were fiercely partisan, funded by political parties specifically to talk absolute trash about the other side. Benjamin Franklin's own grandson, Benjamin Franklin Bach, used his newspaper to call George Washington spoiled, deceitful, and a tyrant. Washington absolutely hated it, but he didn't shut down the paper. See, this is the press working exactly as intended. Freedom of assembly. You have the right to gather peacefully in groups, whether that's for a massive political protest, a town hall meeting, or just a convention of people who dress up like comic book characters. Now, you also have the freedom to petition. You have the right to complain directly to the people in charge. You can sign a petition, file a lawsuit, or call your senator's office to tell them exactly what you think of their latest policy. They might put you on hold for an hour, but they legally cannot arrest you for complaining. So let's bring it all together. When you look at these 5 things, religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition, they aren't just dry legal terms written on cold parchment by guys wearing powdered wigs. They are the actual scaffoldings of our daily lives. They're the reason we have the right to be as loudly, weirdly, and unique as we want to be. They are the reason we can argue over sports, criticize our leaders, and build communities. The founders didn't agree on much. The Constitutional Convention was basically a months-long shouting match in a sweltering room in Philadelphia, with the window shut tight because they were terrified of spies. But they understood one core truth, and society only stays free if the citizens have the right to think, speak, and gather without fear. So, as we wrap things up, our very first episode of The Average American, I want to say thank you for joining us. I want to leave you with a question. How are you using your 5 freedoms this week? Because those freedoms are like muscles. If you don't use them, they get weak. So speak up, stay informed, and don't take chaotic beauty of this country for granted. Thank you so much for tuning in to the premiere. If you have enjoyed this mix of history, comedy, and the invincible founding father, hit the subscribe button, leave us a review, and share this with an average American in your life who needs a laugh. I am Chip Michaels. Keep questioning, keep laughing. Good night, everyone. Good day, good night. And the name of the Truman Show, which we have actually heard the name far too often recently. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. We'll get better at this, I promise. Anyways, yeah, well, peace out, guys. Thanks for tuning in.